This segment is the fourth and final segment of Module 5B. This segment focuses on the third step of the SLO development process: choose assessments and set the growth target. If you have not completed segments 1, 2, and 3, please exit this presentation and complete those segments now.
We are moving right along and have now reached step 3, choose assessments and set the growth target. In this step, we will finish completing the SLO template by addressing the assessments, growth targets, and rationale for growth target components. First, you will need to determine how you will assess your students' growth. As a reminder, assessments used on SLOs do not need to be pencil and paper tests. However, they must meet specific criteria, including the following: be reviewed by content experts, be aligned to content standards identified in your SLO, have sufficient stretch, be valid and reliable. If you need to review any of these terms, please review the materials from Module 2 or consult the ODE provided document titled Guidance for Selecting Appropriate Assessments. At this point, I'd like to highlight 2 additional considerations regarding assessments. When appropriate, please consider using the same assessment as your colleagues who teach the same course or subject. Doing so will increase comparability across SLOs. For example, if all 4th grade teachers teach mixed ability science classes using the same curriculum throughout the district, having one assessment that all 4th grade science teachers administer can help ensure that these SLOs are comparable across teachers. However, if a teacher on the 9th grade mathematics team teaches accelerated mathematics that follows the 10th grade curriculum, and the rest of his or her team teaches courses that follows the 9th grade curriculum, then the accelerated mathematics teacher will need a different assessment than his or her colleagues. In addition, make sure the time required to administer and score the assessment is reasonable to avoid overburdening your students. Have you already selected an assessment that will be appropriate for your SLO? If so, great. If not, please pause here and review the assessments available to see if any will be appropriate. If you need to create an assessment, we suggest that you exit this module and return when the assessment has been created and reviewed by content experts. Please remember that ODE strongly recommends that no teacher create an assessment in isolation. Now you are ready to complete the assessment component on your SLO template. Providing sufficient detail in your description here will help the reviewer determine if your assessment meets the criteria on the SLO template checklist. Initially, you will probably be asked to submit your assessment along with your SLO for approval. In the future, your district may create an approved list of assessments for the use in SLOs. If this occurs, you will no longer need to submit the assessment along with the SLO template. Because your reviewer may not be familiar with the assessment you are using, ODE recommends that you include the following key information. In your description of the assessment, you will want to include the name and type of the assessment. Some assessments are easily recognized, while others are not as well known. Please include a description of the format of the assessment and types of questions. You should also describe who reviewed the assessment and/or how you know the assessment aligns with course standards. You will need to include some additional information in the assessment section. You should describe how you know the assessment has sufficient stretch, meaning that it will capture the performance of students who are high performing and those who are low performing. If you will be combining multiple assessments, you need to explain how you will combine them, such as by averaging the scores, adding them, weighting them, and so on. Finally, you may want to include information about how the assessment will be administered and scored, especially if you are using a performance assessment. Please pause the presentation now to complete the assessment portion of your SLO template. Remember to review the SLO template checklist while writing so that you can make sure that you are meeting all the requirements of this component. Resume the recording when you are ready to proceed. At this point, you may be feeling like this process has taken a long time. Keep in mind that the SLO development process will get easier over time as you become more familiar with it. Hang in there, you are nearing the completion of your first SLO. The second part of Step 3 is setting the growth targets. We talked at length about growth targets in Module 3. As a reminder, here are some critical things to remember when setting growth targets. In a class or course level SLO, all students must have a growth target. When setting the targets, you must use the information available to you to determine the expected performance of your students. This information may include baseline data, trend data, and specified expectation from vendors or the district. When possible and appropriate, targets should be tiered or differentiated so that all students can show developmentally appropriate growth. Remember that targets should be rigorous yet attainable. For example, ambitious yet attainable targets in some cases may expect students to show 1.25 years of growth. However, expecting students to show 3 years of growth in 1 year is ambitious yet unrealistic. You may remember from Module 3 that a one-size-fits-all approach to setting growth targets does not exist. But if you keep these things in mind, you will be well on your way to constructing appropriate growth targets. If you need to, exit the module now and review your materials from Module 3 before returning. If you're ready to set your growth targets, pause here. If possible, share the growth targets that you have set with your colleagues and get their input on appropriateness. Resume the recording when you are ready. Okay, ready to fill in the growth target component of the SLO template? In the growth target section, you will need to include the growth targets, usually in the form of a table. To reduce the amount of inference required from the observer and to minimize the likelihood that the SLO will be sent back to you for revisions, you should also include a brief description of how you set the growth targets using baseline data and how you ensure they are ambitious and developmentally appropriate for students. Including the baseline data in the table could be very beneficial here. Pause the recording now to complete this section and check yourself using the SLO template checklist. When you are finished, press play to move on to the rationale. The final section of the SLO template is the rationale. This piece ties the rest of the SLO together by containing a strong justification for why you constructed your SLO the way that you did. When writing the rationale, think about your answers to the question on the slide and then combine your answers to create a coherent justification for your SLO. Ready? Think of your answers as I read this slide. How did you identify student needs and determine appropriate growth targets? Think about what data you analyzed at the beginning of this module to first identify student needs. How does this SLO address student needs? Explain how if students meet their targets, they will have shown significant progress in an area of need. Why is it so important that students master the content of this SLO? In other words, why does this matter? If students do not master this content or skill, what might happen? How do the targets align with broader school and district goals? Think about how your SLO aligns with your district's instructional priorities for the year, your district's continuous improvement plan, your school's school improvement plan, or district or school initiatives. Finally, how do you know that these targets are appropriate for your students? Think about how you set your growth targets and the information you use to inform the targets. Think about the data you used and any other information, such as expected growth information from a vendor or district, to determine what expectation would be rigorous yet appropriate. Think about how the targets require all students to demonstrate growth and how the targets move the lowest performing students toward proficiency. Now that you've thought through the rationale, compose your justification in the SLO template. And check yourself using the SLO template checklist. Pause here and return when you have completed your rationale for the growth target. Congratulations! At this point, you have completed a draft of your SLO. You are now ready to review your SLO and then submit it. At this point, you have completed steps 1, 2, and 3 of the SLO development process. Now that you have a draft of your SLO, we highly recommend that you review your SLO using the SLO template checklist, preferably with a colleague. Make sure that your SLO satisfies all the applicable criteria in the checklist. Once you have a final draft of your SLO, you are ready to submit it. Submission procedures will vary by district, so please check with your local administrator to find out more about the submission procedure.
In this module, Carol Morbitzer walked you through writing an SLO. As you continue writing SLOs, remember that the SLO template checklist is a critical resource to use throughout the process. In addition, if you have additional questions related to SLOs, please contact the SLO Help Desk at the URL listed on this slide. The Help Desk service enables you to email questions about SLOs and then receive answers within a few days. Keep in mind that requests to review SLOs will not be honored, as SLO approval is completed at the local level. The next module, Module 6, will address calibration and will focus on the SLO approval process. In the meantime, happy SLO writing!